Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out for another Citizen Science Seminar here at Gulf Coast State College. My name's Carrie Fioramonti. I'm an associate professor of biology over in the Natural Sciences Division. I think this might be our 10th year of citizen science seminars. Dr. Linda Fitzhugh and St. Andrew Bay Resource Management kind of fired this whole series up. It's changed hands, and also St. Andrew Bay Resource Management is now Baywatch. And I just want to let you know about that partnership that we have to bring these citizen science lectures to you. This month we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Noah Strycker coming to us from all the way from Oregon. Wow. And he really gets around, and he's going to tell you quite a bit about some of his birding adventures, all of the different species that he has observed, tracked. And today we're going to really feature a bird that we probably don't encounter enough around here, the penguin. So I'd also want to introduce to you another gentleman that really is bringing this whole program to the area, Mr. Brian DeSalt. This is part of a larger program, the Nature Connection, put on by Audubon. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Brian, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about that, maybe even other offerings that you have this week, and I'll let you introduce Noah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that mic up? I don't know.
Not on. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We do have, as she mentioned, we do have a program called Nature Connection, and it's a 5-day program. And Noah's has been here and will be here for that entire period. And he's been in the schools talking about that little guy, Chinstrap penguin. I gave it away anyway. So Noah's extremely knowledgeable in birds. He's an ornithologist, and he loves the penguin, and he loves turkey vultures. So you'll find that out as you go through the program. But our program is nature connected. We're trying to get nature into our schools, and we're trying to raise money for the, I don't think it works, raise money for the programs that we have, which mainly involves working through the Bay Education Foundation, which will be our conduit to the schools in Bay County. So anyway, we're having a good show, and we have some books over here that Noah has, he's written. He has 5 books to his credit, and that's just one we brought over, which deals with another aspect of his presentation, if he maybe want to comment on it at some point. But anyway, I'm not going to delay the proceedings, and Noah's here, and I think you'll enjoy this show because I've seen it 4 times already, and it gets better every time I see it.
All righty, can y'all hear me all right? Great. Well, yes, my name's Noah. I am from Oregon, from Eugene. I'm a bird guy. I got obsessed by birds in the 5th grade, and these days I work as associate editor of Birding Magazine, which is the publication of the American Birding Association, and write for National Geographic and various other projects. Like in 2015, I did a big year of bird watching around the world, and I set the world record for how many species of birds anybody has ever seen in 1 year. More than 6,000. So that's what's in this book up here. It's called Birding Without Borders, and I'll be talking all about that and stories behind that on Saturday at our program with Audubon over at FSU. But here today, in the meantime, a little bit more science-y and a little bit farther south, I want to tell you some stories about one of my favorite birds in the entire known universe, which is the penguin. So this guy that you've been staring at up here in front of you, eyeball to eyeball, is in fact a Chinstrap penguin. You can see them down in Antarctica. And a couple of years ago, the BBC came out with a little video clip, which I want to show you. I don't know if some of you saw this video about a colony of penguins in Antarctica that amazingly had learned to fly. And so these penguins, after their nesting season, were discovered to get up and migrate from the Antarctic Peninsula across all the icebergs and out over the ocean, over the Drake Passage, which is between the Antarctic Peninsula and South America, northward so that they could escape the cold Antarctic winter and spend their winter in the tropical rainforests of the Amazon basin in South America. this video did come out on April the 1st, so just for the record, this is totally fake, okay? This was completely animated by the producers of BBC World Television, and although when they showed it on TV, a lot of people believed it. So there are people you will even meet out there today who are like, oh yeah, there's that one colony of penguins that can fly, right, in Antarctica? Well, no, it is April Fool's Day, after all, tomorrow. So you may see it on a rerun. But I want to kick things off here for this presentation with this piece of rock that juts out of the Southern Ocean around the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, south of South America. And this is a place called Elephant Island. Elephant Island, just for reference, is quite a ways south of here. So it's right down there on the tip of the peninsula. To get there, you've got to go fly all the way down through South America and make your way south. If you zoom in on that part of the world, so we got our story straight here, there's Chile and Argentina and some of the islands around that area. And then Elephant Island is that one right there. So it's kind of the northernmost piece of island and ice off of the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. And to get there, you've got to make your way to this city called Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world at the southern tip of Argentina. And then from there, get on a ship and go south across the ocean, about 550 miles, through one of the roughest waterways on Earth called the Drake Passage, which has a pretty gnarly reputation. And there's tourist trips that do this as well. So people will inevitably type Drake Passage into YouTube before their trip just to see what to expect. And I'll show you what you get when you search for Drake Passage on YouTube. Here's a nice little Antarctic cruise ship. It spends its other part of the year in places like the Mediterranean, takes about 100 passengers. And in 2010, this ship encountered a wee bit of a storm in the Drake Passage. And here's some footage that was on TV of it. This was after a big wave had burst all of the windows on the bridge and knocked out all of the electronics on board. So they were completely blacked out. And this is being taken by a National Geographic ship that came to help them out. So there's a very nice gentleman here rigging up a satellite phone that they're going to shoot across on a rope to the deck of that stranded ship in the middle of the Drake Passage so that they can call out. This all worked out fine. They ended up making their way back to Ushuaia, but it took them 2.5 days of being bucked around like this in these pretty close to 50, 60-foot waves. So, you know, once in a while, that can happen in the Drake Passage. You can get a storm. That is what we like to call sometimes the Drake Shake. But more often it looks like this, so I think it has a kind of worse reputation than it deserves. This is more like Drake Lake, and on a nice crossing, you'll make your way across this Drake Lake for a couple of days, and then the very first land you see upon approaching Antarctica is this mountainous-looking glaciated rock sticking out of the ocean, which is Elephant Island. Okay, this is what it looks like from the air. 17 miles, 29 miles, it's a couple thousand feet high. Okay, but why do you think this is called Elephant Island? Kind of a weird name, right? I mean, I guess it kind of looks like an elephant, but honestly, the first explorers that went down there and named this place were not seeing it by satellite. They were seeing it from the beaches, and the beaches of the island are covered with elephant seals. So that's probably more the reason why it got its name. But I kind of like a third reason, which is that it's an L of an island, which is actually a direct quote from probably the most famous Antarctic explorer of all time. This gentleman named Ernest Shackleton, you may have heard of. He did various expeditions to Antarctica just a little over 100 years ago. In fact, the centennial of his passing just passed a couple of months ago. And he did a trip in about 1915 with this ship called the Endurance, where he sailed it into the Weddell Sea on a grand, well, he had an idea he was going to try to walk across the entire Antarctic continent, but it didn't really work out because his ship was locked in the ice, and they had to save themselves, and the ship sank underneath the ice. So his men were stranded here for 4 months on Elephant Island while they waited for someone to come rescue them. And that has made Elephant Island probably more famous than anything else throughout history. Today, it's still completely uninhabited, at least by people. And you can read about this whole story. Shackleton's story is like the greatest survival story of all time, so I highly recommend you read this book called Endurance by Alfred Lansing, if you ever get the chance. It is a classic of polar literature. And in fact, that ship, which is also called the Endurance, was just rediscovered a couple of weeks ago by an expedition to Antarctica that put down a submarine and took color videos of it on the sea floor. So I recommend you look that up too, because it's pretty spectacular. Or you can just watch the miniseries with Kenneth Branagh and get the whole Shackleton story. But these days, that all happened 100 years ago. It was a pretty passing footnote in the history of Elephant Island. It's just inhabited by penguins, and the only remnants of Shackleton ever having set foot there is this monument, which is actually not of Shackleton. It's a statue of the Chilean captain who came to rescue them that was installed by the Chilean military in a fit of nationalism in the 1980s. So there's nothing left actually of Shackleton's stuff there. But what else do you see in this photo around the monument? Penguins, yes, lots of penguins. So Elephant Island, totally uninhabited by people. However, there are quite a few inhabitants of this island. They're just all 2 feet tall and black and white and wearing tuxedos. And most of them are a species called the Chinstrap. These are all Chinstrap penguins in one of the colonies on Elephant Island in this photo. Oh, and there's me on Elephant Island. Wait a minute, how did I suddenly jump into this frame? Well, I had been going to Antarctica starting in 2008. I've done maybe 35 trips to the Antarctic continent at this point, many of them as a guide for a tourist expedition. So here I am driving this boat in an Antarctic bay with a humpback whale playing with us. And a couple of years ago in 2019, I had the ice in my veins solidly at this point, and I wanted to do a research project. And the opportunity came up to do a master's degree studying Chinstrap penguins at Stony Brook University in New York. So I jumped on the chance, flew out to Stony Brook on Long Island, and prepared to live there for the next couple of years. So, meet the Chinstrap penguin. These are super cute creatures. They have no fear of people, so they'll walk right up to you on the beach when you arrive. Many of them, having not ever seen a human being before in their whole life, they just see you like this alien that's dropped in from outer space, sent there to entertain them. And they're there in the summer to raise their chicks. They have a couple eggs that hopefully, if all goes well, they'll raise 2 chicks per summer. They come back to the same nesting colony year after year to do that. And the penguin generations go on, as they have for millions of years. They eat this stuff called krill, which you may have heard of. Antarctic krill is possibly the most abundant animal on planet Earth by sheer biomass. Although, there's a couple of other contenders. It's krill versus 2 other species that may be the most abundant by biomass. Can you guess what the 2 other most abundant animals might be? Ants is a good guess, but not to my knowledge. I don't think there's quite that many ants on Earth. Nematodes? Nematodes, okay. Well, I like the way you're thinking small. However, as far as I know, the other 2 would be humans and domestic cows, believe it or not. Cows, humans, and krill. That is our future. The Chinstraps eat lots of krill. They feed it to their chicks. Their chicks grow up, and they graduate at the end of the summer, and they swim off. And then they have a long migration during the winter season, actually. They swim about 4,000 kilometers away from their nesting area to spend the whole winter floating around in the Southern Ocean, out of sight of land, eating more krill before they come back for the following summer. But it's kind of a question, how many chinstrap penguins are there out there? So that is what I set out to pursue with my master's degree, is to do an assessment of all the chinstrap penguins in the world, how they're doing, how their populations are maybe reacting to things like climate change, which is hitting the Antarctic Peninsula disproportionately hard these days, and other things that are changing in the Antarctic ecosystem. And it just so happened that right after I started my master's program, this scientific report came out. This is called the 30 by 30 report. It was put together by a bunch of scientists at Oxford and some other universities, mostly in the UK. It's basically a blueprint for how we can potentially conserve 30% of all the world's oceans by year 2030. So maybe a little bit optimistic, but possible. And you might notice one of the other signatories on this report was the organization Greenpeace. Wait a minute, Greenpeace, aren't those like eco-warriors that hang off of bridges to block shipping lanes and do stuff like go up to cargo ships and paint "Stop Deforestation" on the side of them and do other weird stunts like parachute into the middle of professional soccer games to protest global oil and that kind of thing? Well, yeah, that's Greenpeace. That's what they do. They have all these global campaigns all over the world. But in the background, they also support a lot of hardcore, really serious science and conservation. And so when this 30 by 30 scientific report came out, Greenpeace got all excited about it, and they decided to put together a year-long expedition involving both of their ships, the Esperanza being the larger one, all the way from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And over the course of the year, they would stop at various points along the way, as you can see on this map, take scientists on board, support the scientists with whatever they needed for their scientific project, and then continue on their way from one pole to the other, and use all of this to raise awareness for the 30 by 30 conservation report. So you can see the very last stop was going to be Antarctica. Right after I joined the research lab in New York, Greenpeace came to our lab, which is known for Antarctic science, and said, so we've got this pole-to-pole campaign happening next year. We have a ship called the Esperanza, which we're happy to just give you for 40 days in Antarctica to do whatever you want and do your penguin projects if you want, and we'll totally support your science. Does that sound interesting? And we were like, nah. No, it was an amazing opportunity. So here it is. This ship is called the Esperanza. They did give it to us along with the full crew for 40 days or so. And for my Chinstrap project, I picked out a bunch of very remote Chinstrap penguin colonies that nobody has visited, at least in the past few decades or maybe even ever, that tourists never get to go to. And we would go to each one and do a census of all the penguin colonies and then use that to try to work into this whole project I was doing with Chinstrap penguin populations in general. So this got all pulled together into the Elephant Island Expedition in early 2020. And once I realized I was going on this Greenpeace ship, I started getting materials in my email about what to expect on board the Esperanza. So it was things like, all the food will be vegetarian, and you're going to be sleeping in pretty primitive bunk beds on board, and you should be expecting to do daily chores like cleaning out the toilets and things while you're doing your day-to-day projects. Oh, and by the way, there might be some journalists and celebrities on board as well, because this is a Greenpeace campaign and we're trying to raise awareness for the science that you're doing. So I read that and I just started laughing. I was like, oh, well, do you think Leo is going to be there? Because ever since Leonardo DiCaprio made his climate change speech at the Oscars, he's been like the climate change celebrity out there. No, Leonardo DiCaprio was not there. He never showed up, but you know, you can always dream. Instead, we had these hardcore environmental activists that were totally dedicated to supporting our scientific projects and whatever we wanted to do. So they would take us to shore in some pretty tricky landing conditions. This is using an inflatable Zodiac to land on a beach with some surf breaking. That water is about 0 degrees, and some of these were kind of wet landings to get to the colonies we needed to visit. And then once we were on shore, we were able to go around and do our penguin counts. What made Elephant Island particularly interesting, at least from my perspective, was that there was one existing survey of the penguins there from exactly 50 years before. In the year 1970, a British expedition had gone there and spent a couple of months and very carefully mapped out all of the penguin colonies. This is their map of the 32 penguin colonies around the shorelines of Elephant Island, and counted how many nests there were in each one. Nobody had been back there since then, so it was this cool opportunity to do a new count in 2020 and compare how the penguins are doing now to how they were doing a half century ago, and see whether they're going up, whether they're going down, staying stable. We didn't really know what to expect. But, okay, how do you count them all? There are a lot of penguins on Elephant Island. This is only one part of one small colony. Well, the traditional way to census a colony of penguin nests is to do it by hand. So you land there, you get a good viewpoint from a rock, and you literally count the nests one by one. 1, 2, 3, 4. You do each count 3 times and make sure you're within about a 5% error of yourself so that you're doing it accurately. But you are just counting nests, not the total number of penguins, which means they're not moving around, which makes it slightly easier. And you kind of get your eye in after a while and use rocks and landmarks to make sure that you're not double counting them or counting them twice or anything like that. So the benefits of doing it like this are that it's very simple in terms of equipment. All you need is a little hand counter and a field notebook to write all your observations for the day down. And this is how penguin counts have been done since the start of penguin science just a few decades ago in Antarctica. So it means you can compare directly the data that you're getting today against whatever people have counted there in the past. But we did have some other tricks up our sleeve because there is more technology around these days than there was in 1970. So we also had a drone team from Northeastern University joining us, and their whole mission was to survey all of the same colonies from the air with this drone with a camera attached. Here's what it looks like when you're looking down on a colony of chinstrap penguins. See all those kind of pinkish white areas? If you look closely at any one of them, you start to see some specks in the pinkish white zones. Those are the penguin subcolonies, so that's packed full of chinstrap penguin nests. And if you look really carefully, in the very middle of the frame, you can see me walking along the edge of the penguin colony for size reference. And then if you get a little bit closer, you can start to see how the penguin nests are spaced. At a constant density, as long as there's not rocks and things in the way, within pecking distance of their nearest neighbors. And so from the air, with a bird's eye view, so to speak, you can get a nice vantage point of a large penguin colony and do a somewhat more accurate count by taking this kind of imagery back home after the end of the season and getting an undergrad to put dots on every single nest, just like this. But there's not always undergrads available, so I ended up counting about 37,000 nests myself this way, which took months of my life putting dots on images like this in Photoshop and other programs. You can see each nest in this image, though, has a red dot on it, and it takes a minute to kind of see what's going on. So the black and white ones are the adult penguins. And then if you look closer, you can see there are some gray fuzzy ones. Those are their chicks. And there are 1 or 2 chicks with each nest that stick close to their parents. So you can see how many nests there are in an image like this. But it does take a lot of hours to do this kind of counting. So we also started training a computer algorithm, an AI system, to be able to look at drone images like this and count penguin nests automatically. So here's an output of the AI from just one example. It is just looking at this image in the background and then putting a box around everything that it thinks is an adult penguin with 1 or 2 chicks nearby that would count as a nest. And then the percentages are how confident it is in each one. And you can see this is working actually remarkably well. Most of those percentages are around 100%, and they line up with what we were counting. And then if you start running this on larger blocks, this is a high-resolution image of an entire island full of nesting penguins. You can't even really see the penguins at this point, but you can see where their subcolonies are in the middle, that slightly lighter, pinker color. I counted this myself, and then we compared it with the AI system. When I counted it by hand, it took me many hours, and I counted 6,223 penguin nests in this very image by zooming in. And then we ran the AI, and about 1 second, it counted 6,203. So that is remarkably accurate. I mean, that's within 1/3% or so error from the hand count to the computer count, and it's actually kind of hard to say which one of those is more accurate at this point. So pretty cool. This became its own scientific paper and everything that we put out, just that you can do this, and maybe this is the future of doing censuses of seabird colonies and other places around the world. But for my part, on the Elephant Island expedition, I was mostly doing the old traditional, old-fashioned hand count. So I'd be up on a rock looking out over the Chinstraps. And it gets to be kind of a zen activity after a while, just staring at penguins all day long, every day for hours, splitting up. So you're kind of out there on your own among the penguins. Although there were some other things to look at too. It wasn't just Chinstraps. We had some Gen 2 penguins around. It's a different species that has orange-red on the beak and those white earmuffs on the side of their head. And we had a couple of Adelie penguins. These tend to be found farther south, but the northern edge of their range is around Elephant Island. There were also a couple others. This one is called the macaroni penguin because it has those yellow feathers on its head. You know that old song, Yankee Doodle Dandy stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni? That's where the name macaroni penguin comes from. It's like this old name for a fancy hat or something like that. It's nothing to do with pasta. And then finally, the biggest one we had was a king penguin. They are almost as large as the emperor penguin that you may have seen in March of the Penguins and Happy Feet in the past, and quite colorful. So pretty cool to have these various species of penguins around on the shores of the island. There were a couple of nights that we camped out. We set up tents on the island, and kind of neat to be one of the only humans to have ever slept on Elephant Island besides Shackleton and his guys 100 years ago. Although one of the hazards of camping on a beach in Antarctica is that it's light 24 hours a day during the summer. So at about 1 o'clock in the morning, this elephant seal wriggled up from the beach and was very curious about our tents. And you've got to watch these seals like a hawk because they are what's called thigmotactic, which means they like to snuggle with each other to keep each other warm. And this one didn't have a snuggle buddy, so it looked at our tents and was headed straight for him. And it took quite a bit of motivation for it to finally turn around at 1 o'clock and not smash our tents to death to snuggle with us while we were sleeping. But here's another one that discovered our gear pile on the beach one day. And man, after you've had a molting elephant seal sitting on top of your gear for several hours, it just never quite smells the same, no matter how much you clean it off after that. But they are pretty cute to look at. Oh, and in our camp with us, we did end up having a couple of celebrities, sort of. This guy, Gustav, is an actor who was in the series Vikings. I guess he played this character. I'd never really seen that series, so I didn't know who he was. But a lot of people were super excited to have him hanging out with us in Antarctica. He also has a somewhat famous dad, Stellan Skarsgård, who's been in various movies and Hollywood films and that kind of thing. His dad wasn't with us, but we heard a lot about him. We also had this actress, Marion Cotillard. She is a French actress who won the Oscar a few years ago for Best Actress. And she actually has been in several movies with Leonardo DiCaprio. So maybe if Leo wasn't there with us, actually, he was there with us sort of in spirit. So I was very happy about that. Marion was super cool. And then finally, this Chinese lady was probably more famous than anyone else, but she didn't end up coming because at the last minute, Mimi was coming from a region of China called Wuhan or something like that, and they told us that she had to cancel her travel plans because there was this weird virus coming out of that part of China. And that was the first time I had ever heard the word coronavirus in my life, was because this celebrity Chinese actress was not going to be able to come join us in Antarctica. And so, yeah, we all know how the rest of that story went. So after our penguin counts, we crunched all the data, and to cut a long story short, I'll just show you the results. This is before and after. So on the left, this map is showing in the red circles the relative size of each Chinstrap penguin colony in 1970. And on the right, it's showing the same scale, except in 2020. So if you kind of flick your eyes back and forth from 1970 to 2020, the ones on the north side of the island, maybe not a huge change. The ones on the south side of the island, though, had dropped a lot. And if you add them all up, we were expecting 120,000 penguin nests, but we found considerably fewer because they had declined by about 57% since 1970. So who knows why? I mean, we can get into all that stuff at another time. I'm not a climate scientist. There's also other things happening in Antarctica, like a krill fishery that is increasing every year now, and the rebound of whale populations after whales were decimated by commercial whalers about 100 years ago. So things are just shifting around, and it looks like the Chinstrap penguins have declined quite a bit since the 1970s, at least in this part of their range. So it was interesting, and I wrote this up into my first ever scientific paper, so I'm putting it up here just so I can brag about it, basically. And it got published, and I was like, yep, all right, job well done. Phew, I got my master's field work just before the world shut down, and I've added that much more to the world's knowledge of penguins. And then I kind of thought, well, you know, all right, but who really is going to care about how many penguins there are on some forsaken island in Antarctica that hardly anyone has ever even heard of in the first place? This is kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears the sound, does anyone even have the knowledge that it was there in the first place? Well, it turns out quite a few people did care after this paper was published. It was in the New York Times, National Geographic picked it up, then it went out on Reuters and Time magazine, and from there it just went around the world in pretty much all of the world's major media outlets, some of them reporting more accurately than others the results of our study. So it was interesting to see how this was reported in various corners of the world. But then, after all this happened, Leonardo DiCaprio himself posted a picture of me on his Instagram page counting penguins with the subtitle, "Climate Change is Starving Antarctica's Most Iconic Animal," which I suppose is the very short version of what we think is happening. But there you go. I made it to Leo's Instagram after all, so it did finally come full circle. And then I wrote up all the results of my studies into a larger paper that incorporated not just Elephant Island, but all the Chinstrap penguins and all the places that they live all around Antarctica, and found that in fact they are declining in large parts of their range, at least from the first studies that we have, which start around the 1970s, because there isn't a lot of older data out there about them. And this is useful for things like marine protected areas, which are now being set up in different parts of the world, including Antarctica. These are regions where fishing activity especially is limited or barred from happening in the future. And in the dark blue, those are marine protected areas that have been proposed. And in the light blue, those are MPAs that are already in place. So the one at the bottom is called the Ross Sea MPA. That was put in place in 2016. It's now the largest marine protected area anywhere on Earth. And you can see up in the upper left, the Antarctic Peninsula is pretty much entirely within a proposed MPA that people are kind of still working out the details, especially China and Russia are sort of dragging their feet with the Antarctic Treaty System. But I think it may be enacted sometime in the next few years. And that could be good news for the Chinstrap penguins, especially if we can just limit some of the krill fishing that's happening right next to their breeding colonies in some parts of their range. So the penguins will survive. They're not endangered or anything. There's millions of chinstrap penguins left, and hopefully will still be around for many more years to come. There are also some other animals around Antarctica as well, and I just wanted to end by showing you a couple of them, especially the predators. So this one is called a leopard seal. Leopard seals are like the polar bears of the southern hemisphere. There are no polar bears in Antarctica, just to get the record straight, but there are leopard seals, and they will eat penguins when they get the chance, and even other seals. And then sometimes you see orcas when you're out and about in Antarctica as well. And I'll show you a little video. This is a group of orcas on a tourist trip I was on recently. And oh, what's that? That's a penguin trying to escape from the killer whales. And it found our Zodiac and joined us on board. But then, okay, that's great, but you've got a penguin in your boat. What do you do when you have a penguin in your boat? Because it's not going to jump back out again when there's killer whales or leopard seals in the water. The killer whales are still following along, like we know there's a penguin in there. So, okay, here's another penguin in the front of our boat. Super friendly, doesn't really care about us because it knows that we're not a threat to it. Whereas if it gets back in the water, the leopard seal that was chasing it earlier very definitely is a threat to it. So they're taking pictures of it and then realize that there are some other penguins on top of this iceberg nearby. So maybe we can give it a little ride over to the iceberg so it can rejoin its friends and be safe from the leopard seal. And the penguin seemed to get the idea. It was looking up and it was like, oh yeah, okay, well, we're getting closer and closer and judging the distance, and there, oh, yep, there it goes. So there you go. If you can't save all of the penguins in the whole world, at least you can save them one at a time from the ravages of the leopard seals and the killer whales. And that, my friends, is all I have about penguins for you today. Thank you so much for coming here and listening. I think we do have some time for a couple of questions if anyone has any questions about penguins or where babies come from. Yeah. Oh yeah, speak into this microphone so they can hear it on the recording.
So you said in the winter that they float. What are they floating on, and is that what they're floating on also in trouble?
Yeah, so what do the penguins do in the winter? How do they float? Well, maybe I should have been more specific when I said they're floating around. I meant they're just swimming. So they swim in the ocean for months or even sometimes years at a time, and they don't stand on anything solid. They may once in a while haul out on an ice floe if they're around the edge of the pack ice in the winter, but especially these chinstrap penguins, we've tracked them now with little satellite chips over the course of the winter so we can see exactly where they go. And they are outside the pack ice zone. So they're just in the open ocean, hundreds of miles from anything, swimming around. And it's kind of hard to twist your mind around, like, how can they do that? How can they sleep in the ocean and eat and do everything they need to do? But for a penguin, it's really the opposite of how we normally see them, because they are supremely adapted for life in the water. Their ancestors were able to fly at some point in the past, and they have lost the ability to fly just so that they could swim better. And they've evolved these very densely packed feathers, almost like fish scales, and they've evolved other ways of swimming around like a fish or a seal or a whale. And so that's kind of what they do, is they just live in the water and in the ocean. And that is also why when they come on shore, they are so awkward, and that's what makes them so cute to us when they come on land, because they have to stand upright because their feet are so far back on their bodies to be more aerodynamic in the hydrodynamic in the water. And then they wobble side to side because their legs and their feet are super short because they don't want to sacrifice too much heat loss from those when they're in the water. So all of those characteristics also just happen to make them cute when they're on shore. But that's really not where they spend their time. So the only reason they ever come to land at all is to make a nest, because they can't lay an egg in the ocean, or they probably would if they could.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions? I was curious, is there a status for the Chinstrap penguin at all? I don't know who would actually do that in
that's
the
a good
Antarctic.
question.
I don't know.
Is there a status for the chinstrap? Well, the IUCN Red List has assessed all these penguin species, and the chinstrap currently is listed as least concern. So that is the best possible population level. In descending order, then it's like near threatened, and then you go all the way down to endangered and critically endangered and extinct. But the chinstrap is not even close. I think there is a case to be made because they're declining within just a couple of generations in penguin years, that they should be uplisted to threatened from least concern. But at the moment, that is what they're listed as, is just a very population is in good shape.
Thank you.
I can just sound out.
Just
Is
for
there much
recording.
evidence that
It's for
they,
recording. Thank you.
Is there much evidence that the penguins are caught on longline fishing, like the albatrosses and shearwaters?
Yeah. Good question. So the question is about longline fishing, which has been a big issue for especially tube-nosed seabirds, albatrosses and petrels in the Southern Ocean. A longline is a fishing boat that has a long fishing line that they deploy out the back end of it that can be something like 40 miles in length. That is kept at the surface by a series of buoys, and then it has hooks hanging down from it at intervals, and they can put out thousands of hooks like this on one long line, and then they're baited, and fish get caught on the hooks, and then at some point they come back and redeploy the line back on board and get all the fish. The trouble for the seabirds is that as they're deploying the long line, those hooks are near the surface as they go off the back of the fishing vessel with bait on them, and albatrosses see that and they swoop in and try to grab it, and then they get hooked and they get pulled under by the fishing line and they drown. And that's had a huge impact on, again, albatrosses, seabirds, southern fulmars, petrels, lots of the Southern Ocean seabirds. Penguins, though, don't eat the same things as the albatrosses do for the most part, and they eat them in different parts of the ocean. They're mostly diving down at depth, and they're not really around fishing boats that much. And they almost entirely in the Antarctic summer are eating krill, which is not what the longlines are baited with. So it hasn't been an issue for penguins. Again, for penguins, the most pressing issues these days are probably just climate change, which is diminishing the amount of sea ice that's available in certain parts of their range. Also a krill fishery, which is vacuuming up huge swarms of Antarctic krill and processing them on these huge krill trawlers that are mostly from Norway and also from a couple of other countries. And then the resurgence of whale populations is theorized to increase competition for krill because whales are eating a lot of krill with each bite, and that's krill that the penguins would also eat. So there may be some rebalancing involved with the whales coming back to their former levels as well.
I just want to make sure I have a clear understanding of the range of the penguin, the chinstrap penguins. You're on one tiny island. Is it the entire Antarctic?
Oh, yeah, good question. What is the range of the chinstrap? So penguins overall, there's 18 species in the world, of which the chinstrap is one. They live all in the southern hemisphere, from the Galapagos down to South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Antarctica, and some of the islands in between. The chinstrap, though, only really lives in the immediate region around the Antarctic Peninsula. So it's on the peninsula itself. Some of the islands just off of the peninsula, like Elephant Island and the South Shetland Islands, and then a couple of the island groups farther east called the South Orkney Islands and the South Sandwich Islands, up to a place called South Georgia. That zone is pretty much where all the chinstrap penguins in the world live. So that means they're a little bit different than some of the other penguins in that area, like the Adelie, the black and white ones that I showed earlier. They also live in other parts of Antarctica farther south, where they're doing very well. And the Gentoo, which I also showed, the one with the red on its beak, they also live much farther north, up in the Falkland Islands and places with sandy beaches. So they're expanding actually south into the Antarctic Peninsula now that there's less ice around. So again, as the climate changes in that part of the world, some penguins are being benefited, some penguins are not doing as well, and things are just sort of shifting around where they're somewhat adaptable. There have been huge climatic changes around Antarctica in the past with ice ages and things that have dramatically shifted the amount of ice, and penguins have been around for millions of years. So they've endured some pretty crazy stuff in the past. The question now is just how rapidly it's changing, whether they can keep up and be adaptable with the speed of the climatic changes that are happening. And the chinstrap, because it doesn't occur in other parts of Antarctica, is really limited to that area of the peninsula. So it's just, unless it can move, they're in it for whatever comes down the line. All right, well, we did mention earlier that I have a couple books up here. If you're a super fan and you want to come get a signed copy, come see me after class. But in the meantime, thanks again for coming out.
So I'll speak as loudly as I can. This is for recording, right? Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you so much, Noah. That was amazing. I really appreciate that. Published and everything. I'm looking up those papers. I'm telling you right now. I'm going to find them. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today, joining us. We are going to, well, I won't be. I have to go teach a lab. However, Noah and Brian, and who else is going on the hike? Do we have some other folks from Audubon and Bay County Conservancy? They're going to have a campus birding hike here at Gulf Coast State College and over at FSU. So I do invite you to stick around, follow them, and because I know that they have an eye for some amazing birds. You guys will probably see some birds you would not have otherwise seen. So I hope that you will join them for that. The last thing that I want to let you know about is we do have one more citizen science coming up this school year. It's going to be on April the 19th. This one is going to be over in the ATC 303. Oh goodness, 12:30 p.m. as well. And this is going to be Lauren Albritton from the Gulf World Marine Research Institute out on Panama City Beach. So she'll be giving us a wonderful presentation about their efforts right here locally. So again, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you being here with us.